Hi there, folks. In this lesson, we're going to look at writing equations of ellipses. And just like when we're writing the equation of a circle, we need to find the center and we need to find the radius. Well, writing the equation of the ellipse is very similar. This time we want to find the center, the a value, and the b value. So we want to find the center, the a value, and the b value. And essentially the a value here, when we really think of it, this is the radius of the major axis. Okay, so really we're still finding a radius just like we did with our circle. And then this second piece, the b value, is really just the radius of the minor axis. So really we're still doing the same thing we did with the circle. We're finding center and then we're finding the radii this time, except there's more than one radius. There's a radius for our major and a radius for our minor axis. Okay, and then we're going to write it in standard form. For example, if I look at this first one, I've got endpoints of the major axis and endpoints of the minor axis. And the first thing I want to do is find the center. If I want to find the center of this thing, remember, the center is just at the middle of everything, so I use my midpoint formula. And it doesn't matter if I use the endpoints of the major or endpoints of the minor. Either one is going to work. I'll use the major axis here, and I'm just going to find the midpoint. So the midpoint, I do -2 plus 4 divided by 2. And then I do the 7 plus the 7 divided by 2. And so this gives me a 1. This one gives me a 7. So my center is 1, 7. Okay? And keep in mind, had I done the midpoint of the minor axis, I would have gotten the same thing. The other thing that we can do here, you write down that I want to find a and b, a little bit of a shortcut. If I look at the repeated value here, the 7, that ends up being my y value. If I look at the repeated value here, the 1, that ends up being my x value. Okay, so we can always use that little shortcut for given the major and the minor axis because they have to be lined up. So one of them is lined up in terms of y, the other is lined up in terms of x. Okay? For the a value and the b value, a is essentially the radius of the major axis. So when I look at the major axis from this point to this point, because those 7s are the same, really I just need the distance in terms of counting from -2 to 4. And the distance from -2 to 4 is 6 units, which means my a value, the radius, is going to be 3. It's half of that. All right? The minor axis, when I do the same thing, the distance right here, again, the ones are the same. I can count from 5 to 9. It's 4 units, which means my b value is 2. So now I've got the radius of the major, radius of the minor, which is my a and my b value. I've got everything I need. I just need to decide, is this vertical or horizontal? Remember, vertical or horizontal is determined based on the major axis. So if you think about where the points of the major axis are, -2, 7 is up here somewhere. +4, 7 is up here somewhere. So when I look, I can see that my major axis is horizontal, which means my ellipse is also horizontal. So I'm going to write this as a horizontal ellipse, so x minus h squared over a squared, which is 9, plus y minus k squared over b squared, which is 4, equals 1. And that's it. Okay? If I look at the next one, we're going to do the same thing here. And with this one, I'm going to try to use my shortcut for my center. So the center this time, when I look at the center, because I've got endpoints of the major and minor, and this shortcut only works with major and minor, but I can see that this repeated value right here, the 1, well, I have to be lined up with that in terms of x, so my x value also has to be a 1. All right? In terms of the endpoints of the minor axis, these values, I've got to be lined up with those, so that's also a 1. Okay, so my center is going to be 1, 1. And if I go through and do my midpoint, I should get the same thing. Okay, so I'll get the same thing if I do my midpoint formula. And now I want to find the a and the b value. So when I look at a, again, I look at the major axis, the distance right here. Let me try that again. So again, I ignore those 1s, and I look from -4 to +6 is 10 units, which means my a value is a 5. Down here for my b value next, I'll look at these values. Again, I ignore those 1s. The distance from -2 to +4 is 6 units. So my b value is a 3. And now I just need to determine if this is vertical or horizontal. I look at the major axis. I've got 1, -4 would be down here somewhere. 1, 6 would be up here somewhere. I can see now that my major axis runs up and down. My major axis is vertical, which means my ellipse is vertical. So I'm going to write this as a vertical ellipse, y minus k squared over a squared, which is 25, plus x minus h squared over b squared, which is 9, equals 1. And that's it. If I take a look at this next one, this time I'm given the major axis being 24 units, and it's parallel to the y-axis. The minor axis is 4 units long, and it also gives me the center and tells me that the center is 0, 3. All right, so I've got almost all the information that I need here. And when I look at this thing, again, I want to find the center first. And since the center is given to me, that's 0, 3. The A value, well, that's half of my major axis, so that's 12 units. My B value is half of my minor axis, and since my minor axis here is 4 units, it means my B value is 2. Now, the only other thing I need to do is decide if this thing is vertical or horizontal. Since the major axis has to be parallel to the y-axis, means my major axis is running up and down, okay, because it's got to be parallel to the y-axis, so this one is going to be vertical. So I do y minus k squared over a squared, which is 144, plus x minus h. When I do x minus 0, it's just x, so I write it as x squared over b squared, which is 4, equals 1. And that's it. Okay? If I look at the next one, this one, it gives me endpoints of the major axis, and it gives me the foci. And so once again, I want to find the center. The center is, again, just my midpoint. And I can either use the midpoint of the major or midpoint of the foci. It should give me the same thing. So if I do 0 plus 0 divided by 2, then I do the 10 plus the negative 10 divided by 2, I'm going to end up with 0, comma 0. So my center is 0, 0. It's the origin. The major axis, well, I can see the length of this thing right here. So when I do this, the length, that's 20 units, which means my A value is 10. But then I don't have the B value. I don't have any talk of the minor axis here. What I have, though, is the foci. And if I look at the distance from foci to foci, that's 16. So what that's giving me is my C value. All right? Just like I did with the major axis and just like I did with the minor axis, I find that distance divided by 2. That's my C value. So my C value here is 8. And now from here, I can just go ahead and use this formula, a squared minus b squared equals c squared. And I can solve this for b. I know my a value, 10 squared, is 100. I know that 8 squared is 64. And I'm going to go ahead and solve this thing. I subtract that 100 from each side. I can divide by a negative 1. Find out that b squared equals 36. I take the square root of each side, and I find out that b equals a 6. Okay? So again, my major gives me my a value, the minor can give me the b value, and the foci will give me my c value. And I approach all three of those the same way. I find the distance between the two and then divide it. All right? And now in terms of vertical or horizontal, again, I might think of this thing in terms of the graph. I'll bring it off to the side here. My major axis at 0, 10, which would be up here, and then 0, negative 10 is down here. This one's also vertical, so I'm going to do the y minus 0 squared over a squared, which is 100, plus x minus 0 squared, which is just x squared, over the b squared, which is 36, equals 1. And that's it. So again, you find the center, find the a value, find the b value, plug it in. All right, center is typically the midpoint. A value is half of the major axis, B value is half of the minor, and the C value is half of the foci. Okay?